I just sat there staring at the kitchen table for a full minute. The cold surface of the wood pressed against my palms, but I couldn't really feel it. My chest felt completely tight, like someone had wrapped a thick leather strap around my ribs and was pulling it tighter with every breath I tried to take. On the table lay a single piece of paper, a printed statement from the bank account my grandmother had set up for me when I was just a little kid. The balance column didn't show the $82,000 that was supposed to be there. It didn't show the money that was meant to pay for my tuition, my dorm room, and my books at my dream university. It just showed a series of zeros, followed by a final, crushing number. $0.00. My mother didn't even look up from her phone when I pushed the paper toward her. She just reached for her coffee mug, took a slow sip, and set it down with a quiet clink against the ceramic. My dad stood near the sink, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his eyes fixed on the window looking out into the backyard. "We had to do it, Lucas," my dad said, his voice entirely too quiet, entirely too casual for what he had just done. "Your brother needed the help. Family comes first." They had no idea that beneath the floorboards of my bedroom, inside an old dusty shoebox my grandmother gave me before she died, sat a legal document they had never seen. A document that didn't just prove where that money belonged, but carried a penalty that was about to strip away everything my parents owned. The silence in the kitchen was so heavy you could hear the old refrigerator buzzing in the corner. I looked from my dad to my mother, waiting for one of them to say it was a joke. I waited for them to tell me that they hadn't actually wiped out my entire future with a few clicks of a mouse. But my mother just shifted her weight in her chair, her eyes still glued to her screen, her thumb scrolling through some random social media feed. "You're smart, Lucas," she said, her tone completely flat, like she was talking about the weather or what we should have for dinner. "You can take out student loans, or you can go to the community college downtown for a couple of years. Leo doesn't have your academic skills. He needed this boost to get into his program." My older brother Leo had been accepted into an expensive private film school out of state, a school that cost twice as much as mine, for a degree he had only decided he wanted 2 months ago because he thought it sounded cool. Leo didn't study. He didn't work a part-time job during high school like I did. He spent his weekends crashing my dad's car or buying expensive sneakers with my parents' credit cards. And now my entire life savings had been handed over to pay his first-year tuition and his luxury apartment rent near the campus. "I worked 30 hours a week at the grocery store for the last 2 years, I whispered, my voice cracking slightly. I hated how small I sounded. I hated that I felt like crying in front of them. "Grandma told me that account was strictly for my college. She made you custodians, not owners." My dad finally turned around from the sink. His face hardened, his jaw clenching the way it always did when I dared to question his authority. He stepped toward the table and slammed his hand down right next to the paper with the zero balance. "Watch your mouth," he snapped. "We are your parents. We decide how the resources in this family are used. You live under our roof, you eat our food, and you don't talk to us about what we owe you. We don't owe you anything. Leo is going to make something of himself, and we are supporting him. If you can't handle that, then maybe you need to start looking for somewhere else to live." The injustice of it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. They weren't just taking my money, they were telling me that my hard work, my late-night studying, and my adherence to every single rule they ever set meant absolutely nothing compared to Leo's whims. I looked at the grocery bag sitting on the counter, the unread text messages from my future roommate asking when I was going to pay my half of the housing deposit, and I realized I was completely on my own. But as I walked out of the kitchen and headed up the creaking stairs to my bedroom, a strange, cold calm started to replace the panic in my chest. They thought they had rewritten the rules of my life, but they didn't know Grandma Elena had already written her own.
To understand why they did this, you have to understand what our house was like when Grandma Elena was still alive. She lived with us during the last 7 years of her life, occupying the large downstairs bedroom that used to be our den. Grandma was a quiet woman, but her presence filled the entire house. Her room always smelled faintly of lavender soap, old leather-bound books, and the peppermint candies she kept hidden in her porcelain jewelry dish on the nightstand. When I was a kid, my parents' house never felt like a safe place to land. My dad was a high-level manager at a construction firm, a man obsessed with appearances, status, and perfection. My mother was a real estate agent who spent her entire day smiling at strangers and her entire evening complaining about how exhausted she was. They didn't have time for mistakes, and they certainly didn't have time for a kid who preferred reading history books to playing varsity sports. Leo was everything my dad wanted. He was loud, athletic, aggressive, and popular. From the time we were toddlers, the favoritism wasn't even subtle. If Leo scored a goal in a middle school soccer game, my dad would buy him a brand new mountain bike to celebrate. If I brought home a report card with 100% in advanced mathematics, my mother would look at it, sigh, and say, "That's nice, Lucas. Now go tell your brother to wash his hands for dinner." Grandma Elena saw everything. She didn't say much to my parents because she knew it would just cause a massive screaming match, but she made sure I knew I wasn't invisible. Every afternoon when I got home from school, I wouldn't go to the living room where Leo and my dad were watching sports. I would go straight to the downstairs bedroom. I can still hear the soft sound of her slippers sliding across the hardwood floor as she moved to open the door for me. She would sit in her old green armchair, the fabric worn thin on the armrests, and point to the small wooden stool next to her. "Sit down, Lucas," she would say, her voice smooth and steady like a calm river. "Tell me what you learned today. Don't worry about the noise outside this door. The loudest people rarely have anything important to say." When I was 14, Grandma Elena called me into her room on a rainy Saturday morning. My parents had taken Leo into the city to buy him a luxury leather jacket for his birthday, leaving me behind to clean the garage. My hands were covered in black grease and dirt, and my eyes were stinging from the cold air. Grandma made me sit down, handed me a warm cup of sweet tea, and pulled a small blue bank book from her apron pocket. "Look at this," she said, pointing her wrinkled finger at the numbers inside. "This is an account I set up the day you were born. I've been putting money away from my pension every single month. It's for your college, Lucas. Not for a car, not for clothes, not for anyone else, just for you." I remember looking at the total. It was around $45,000 back then. To a 14-year-old, it looked like a mountain of gold. "Why aren't you giving one to Leo?" I asked, genuinely confused. Grandma Elena leaned back in her chair, her sharp gray eyes looking right through me. "Because your brother will always have your parents to bail him out. They will give him everything until they have nothing left to give. But you, my sweet boy, you have a brilliant mind and a soft heart. The world is hard on people like you. I am making sure you have a shield when the time comes." She explained that because I was a minor, my parents' names had to be on the account as custodians, but she made me promise to keep track of the bank book. Over the next 4 years, the account grew as the investments settled and she added more of her savings. When she passed away during my junior year of high school, the house felt entirely empty. The smell of lavender disappeared, replaced by the sterile scent of my mother's expensive cleaning sprays. My parents immediately cleared out her room, turning it back into a den within a week, as if she had never been there. They took her furniture to the local dump, but they missed the old metal strongbox she had buried deep in the back of her closet, the one she had given me the key to just 3 days before her heart finally stopped. The subtle changes started almost immediately after Grandma Elena's funeral. The atmosphere in our home shifted from competitive to strangely secretive. I started noticing my parents having long, whispered conversations at the kitchen island late at night, the low murmur of their voices cutting through the quiet house like a bad radio signal. Whenever I walked into the room, the whispering would stop instantly. My mother would pick up a dish towel and start wiping a clean counter, and my dad would suddenly become deeply interested in the sports section of his newspaper.
One night, around 6 months ago, I went downstairs to get a glass of water at 2 a.m. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw the amber light from my dad's office spilling out onto the hallway floor. "We can't afford it, Mark." My mother's voice came through the cracked door, tight with anxiety. "Leo's credit card debt from the spring break trip alone is $5,000, and now this private school application fee? If we don't pay the back taxes on the rental property by winter, the county is going to place a lien on it." "I know what the numbers look like, Sarah," my dad snapped back, his voice rough with sleep and frustration. "But I'm not letting my son go to a local community college like some nobody. He has potential. We just need to find a liquid asset we can move around. Temporary restructuring. We'll put it back before anyone notices." I stood in the dark hallway, the cold floorboards freezing my bare feet, my heart slamming against my ribs. Temporary restructuring? Liquid asset? I didn't know exactly what they meant at the time, but a sick feeling started to form in the pit of my stomach. The next day at breakfast, I tried to bring up my college applications. I had just received my acceptance letter from the state flagship university, along with an honors program invitation. I was incredibly proud of it. I laid the large purple envelope right next to Leo's cereal bowl. "I got into the honors engineering track," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They need the initial intent to enroll form and the housing deposit by the end of next month." My mother didn't even look up from her laptop. "That's great, Lucas. Just let us know what the paperwork looks like." "The deposit is $500, I pointed out. "It has to come from the savings trust Grandma built. I don't have the login credentials for the custodian portal. Dad, can you pull it up tonight so we can send the transfer?" My dad paused, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. His eyes flicked to my mother for a fraction of a second, a tiny, nervous movement that most people would have missed, but I had spent my entire life reading his face to see if I was about to be yelled at. I saw the hesitation clear as day. "The system has been having some security updates lately, Lucas," he said, his voice dropping into that smooth, corporate tone he used when he was lying to a client. "The bank told me the custodian accounts are locked for online transfers until the end of the quarter. Don't worry about it right now. Focus on your final exams. We have plenty of time to handle the finances." "But the deadline is in 3 weeks," I said, a small note of panic creeping into my voice. "If the housing deposit is late, I lose my spot in the honors dorm." Leo let out a loud snort from across the table, his mouth full of sugary cereal. "Oh no, the nerd won't get to live with the other nerds. What a tragedy." "Shut up, Leo," I muttered. "Watch your tone," my dad barked, pointing a finger at me. "Your brother was just making a joke, and I told you I am handling the account. Do not ask me about it again. I don't have time to play accountant for you every single day while I'm trying to run a multi-million-dollar construction division. We will look at it when I say we look at it." I looked at my mother, waiting for her to say something, anything, to defend my timeline, but she just reached over, pulled the purple envelope toward herself, and slipped it into a drawer full of old bills and coupons, completely out of sight. That was the moment the sick feeling in my stomach turned into absolute certainty. They weren't just being busy, they were hiding something from me, and they were using anger to keep me from finding out what it was.
The conflict didn't stay hidden for long. 2 weeks later, I came home from my shift at the grocery store around 9:30 p.m. My feet were throbbing from standing on the hard linoleum floor for 6 hours, and my shirt smelled like old cardboard from stocking the soup aisle. As I opened the front door, the first thing I saw was a massive stack of expensive leather luggage sitting in the entryway, brand new, monogrammed with Leo's initials. Beside the luggage was a large, glossy brochure for the Cinematic Arts Department at the private university out of state. I walked into the living room. My parents and Leo were sitting on the couch, a bottle of champagne resting in an ice bucket on the coffee table. My dad was beaming, his arms slung over Leo's shoulders like they had just won the Super Bowl. "There he is," my dad said, his mood completely different from the anger of the previous week.
Lucas, look at this. Your brother just got his official housing assignment. Penthouse suite, right next to the campus studios. He's going to be living like a king out there. How are we paying for this? The words came out of my mouth before I could stop them. The room went completely dead silent. The joy from my dad's face evaporated, replaced by a cold, dangerous glare. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "I asked how we're paying for it," I said, stepping further into the room, ignoring the warning bells screaming in my head. "You told me our family accounts were locked. You told me we didn't have $500 for my housing deposit. But now you have thousands of dollars for leather luggage and a penthouse suite for Leo? Where did that money come from, Dad?" My mother stood up quickly, her face pale, her hands fluttering nervously around her pearl necklace. "Lucas, that is enough. Go up to your room. We are having a family celebration." "I am part of this family," I shouted, the frustration of 18 years finally boiling over. "My college starts in less than a month. I received an email today saying my enrollment is on hold because the tuition payment bounced. The custodian account was listed as insufficient funds. What did you do with Grandma's money?" My dad stood up from the couch so fast he knocked over one of the empty champagne flutes on the table. It shattered against the wood, sending tiny shards of glass flying across the rug. He marched across the room until he was less than an inch from my face. I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "I will tell you exactly what I did with it," my dad roared, his chest heaving. "I moved that money into an account that actually matters. Your grandmother was old, Lucas. She didn't understand how the modern world works. She left that money to a kid who is just going to sit in a laboratory or a library for 4 years and make 40 grand a year when he graduates. Leo has a real chance to do something big. He has the personality, the look, the drive. He needed the capital to get his foot in the door at a top-tier school." "It wasn't your money," I whispered, my heart breaking into a million pieces right there in front of him. "It was Grandma's. It was mine." "It became our money the second she died and left us in charge of it," my dad said, his voice turning ice cold, completely devoid of any guilt or remorse. "We spent $82,000 to secure your brother's future. It's done. The papers are signed. The tuition for his first 2 years is completely paid. If you want to go to your little honors program, you go find a bank and you sign your name on a loan document like every other normal kid. Do not ever look at me again and accuse me of stealing what belongs to this family." Leo sat on the couch, a small, triumphant smirk on his face as he picked up his phone and started texting someone. My mother just looked away, staring at the shattered glass on the floor, completely refusing to meet my eyes. I realized then that they didn't just favor Leo, they completely despised my independence. They had taken the one thing Grandma Elena had given me to protect myself, and they had used it to build a golden pedestal for the son who had never earned a single thing in his life. I turned around without saying another word, walked up the stairs to my room, and locked the door behind me. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for 3 hours, listening to the muffled sounds of their laughter downstairs as they went back to their celebration. The betrayal felt like a physical sickness. My own parents had stolen my future to pay for my brother's luxury lifestyle, and they felt absolutely no guilt about it. They thought they had won. They thought I was trapped. But then I looked at the old wooden floorboards right under my desk. I knelt down, pulled back the small blue rug, and used the tip of my pocket knife to pry up the loose piece of oak that Grandma Elena had shown me years ago. Beneath it sat the heavy gray metal strongbox. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely insert the small brass key into the lock. The metal mechanism turned with a heavy, satisfying click. Inside were several old photographs of Grandma when she was young, her marriage certificate, and a thick manila envelope sealed with red tape. On the front, her neat cursive handwriting read, "For Lucas, when they think they have taken everything." I tore the envelope open. Inside was a legal document titled the Elena Miller Family Trust Agreement and Asset Protection Directive. It was dated 3 years ago, executed just 8 months before she passed away. As my eyes scanned the legal language, the breath completely left my body. Grandma Elena hadn't just set up a regular savings account at the local bank. She hired a high-end estate attorney in the city, a man named Mr. Edward Vance. The document stated that the $82,000 in the custodian account was actually a subtrust funded entirely by her personal inheritance from her late husband. My parents were indeed listed as custodians, but the trust contained a strict, legally binding non-diversion and automatic clawback. The clause explicitly stated that if the custodians ever withdrew more than $5,000 without the co-signature of the primary beneficiary, me, after my 17th birthday, or if any portion of the funds was used for any individual other than Lucas Miller, the trust would immediately be declared in default. And the penalty for that default was breathtaking. The document explained that the very house we were living in, the large 4-bedroom suburban home my dad bragged to his colleagues, didn't actually belong to my parents. My grandfather had bought the house 40 years ago. When he died, he left the property to Grandma's life estate, with the stipulation that upon her death, the title would transfer to a family trust managed by Grandma. My parents had been living there under a $0 lease agreement provided by Grandma's trust, believing the house would automatically become theirs when she died. But Grandma had rewritten the trust parameters. The document stated that in the event of a custodial default or misappropriation of the educational funds, the entire legal title of the residential property would immediately and automatically transfer to me, Lucas Miller, as the sole owner. My parents would be stripped of all residency rights, turned into illegal occupants on 48 hours' notice. Attached to the document was a business card for Mr. Edward Vance, with a small note scribbled on the back. "Lucas, if they touch your school money, call Edward. He has the master deed. Don't let them steal your light." I sat on the floor, the papers scattered around my knees, a wild, hysterical laugh bubbling up in my chest. My parents hadn't just taken my college tuition, they had inadvertently traded their own house for Leo's film school.
The next morning, I didn't say a word to anyone in the house. I woke up at 7 a.m., slipped the manila envelope into my backpack, and took the bus downtown to the legal district. Mr. Edward Vance's office was located on the top floor of a sleek glass building that looked out over the entire city. When I walked into the lobby, I felt entirely out of place in my worn-out grocery store uniform and sneakers. But the secretary looked at my name, her eyes widening slightly, and immediately led me into a massive office lined with leather books. Mr. Vance was an elderly man with sharp blue eyes and a perfectly tailored gray suit. He looked up from his desk, a warm, genuine smile breaking across his face as he stood up to shake my hand. "Lucas," he said, his voice deep and comforting, "I've been waiting for this call for nearly 2 years. Your grandmother was a very wise woman. She knew exactly who her son was, and she knew exactly how his wife operated. Have they touched the account?" I laid the bank statement with the zero balance on his desk. "They emptied it last week. $82,000. They paid for my brother's private film school tuition." Mr. Vance picked up the statement, his eyes narrowing as he read the transaction numbers. He let out a long, slow sigh, but there was no surprise in his face, just a cold, professional determination. "They fell right into the trap,"
Mr. Vance said, walking over to a large filing cabinet. He pulled out a thick leather binder stamped with the county seal. This is the master deed for the property on Oak Ridge Lane. Your parents have been signing real estate documents, listing it as their primary asset on loan applications, completely assuming they owned it. But under the terms of your grandmother's trust, they were just tenants at will. The moment your father signed that withdrawal slip to pay for Leo's school, he legally triggered the transfer of the property title to you. What happens now? I asked, my heart pounding. We filed the default certification with the county clerk this afternoon, Mr. Vance explained, a sharp gleam in his eyes. By Friday morning, the title will officially be in your name. I will prepare an immediate eviction directive and an asset freeze on the trust subaccounts. Your parents will have exactly 48 hours to clear out of the house or face formal trespassing charges. Friday is Leo's going away party, I muttered, a sudden realization hitting me. They've invited the whole extended family, aunts, uncles, my dad's boss. They're having a huge dinner in the backyard to celebrate his enrollment. Mr. Vance paused, looking over his reading glasses at me. A slow, calculating smile spread across his lips. Well, Lucas, it sounds like we have the perfect venue to serve the paperwork. It's always best to handle these estate matters when all interested parties are present to witness the execution of the final will. The next 3 days were an agonizing test of my ability to play dumb. I went to work at the grocery store, came home, and sat at the kitchen table while my mother finalized the catering orders for Leo's party. The house was a whirlwind of activity. Delivery trucks arrived with cases of expensive wine, party tents, and flowers. My dad was walking around the yard, showing off his new outdoor grill to the neighbors, completely treating the property like his personal kingdom. Every time they ignored me or made a passive-aggressive comment about how I should start filling out my community college financial aid forms, I just reached into my pocket and felt the cold metal key Mr. Vance had given me. The countdown was ticking, and my parents were spending thousands of dollars decorating a house they didn't even own anymore. Friday evening arrived, clear and warm. By 6 p.m., the backyard was packed with nearly 30 people. The smell of expensive steaks on the grill filled the air, and classical music was playing softly from the wireless speakers my dad had installed around the patio. My Aunt Clara was there, along with my Uncle David and several of my dad's high-level colleagues from the construction firm, including his regional vice president, Mr. Henderson. Leo was standing near the center of the lawn, wearing a designer linen shirt, holding a glass of punch, surrounded by his friends as he bragged about the film studio equipment he was going to be using in the fall. My parents were in their absolute element. My mother was floating between groups, laughing loudly, making sure everyone saw the large banner that read, "Congratulations, Leo, our future Hollywood director." I stood near the back door of the kitchen, wearing my regular jeans and a plain black t-shirt, watching the entire production. I felt like a ghost at my own family's event. Nobody came up to talk to me. Nobody asked me what my plans were for September. To them, I was just the quiet, unpromising younger brother who was going to stay behind and work at the grocery store. Around 7:30 p.m., my dad stood up on the stone steps of the patio, clinking his fork against his wine glass to get everyone's attention. The chatter died down, and the guests turned around to look at him, smiling. "Thank you all for coming tonight," my dad said, his voice booming with pride as he raised his glass. "As many of you know, family is everything to Sarah and me. We've worked incredibly hard to build this life, to provide a beautiful home for our boys, and to ensure they have every opportunity to succeed in this world. Tonight, we celebrate Leo's acceptance into one of the most prestigious film programs in the country. It wasn't cheap, let me tell you," he added with a hearty laugh that made the uncles join in. "But when your son has that kind of raw talent, you do whatever it takes to fund his dream. We made the investments, we managed our assets perfectly, and we ensured our boy has a clear path to greatness." The guests applauded. My mother leaned in and kissed Leo on the cheek, her eyes glittering with tears of pride. "Excuse me," my voice said, cutting through the applause. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough to make the people closest to the patio turn around. My dad paused, his glass still raised, his brow furrowing into a tight, annoyed line as he looked down from me on the top step. "Lucas, not right now," he said, his tone dropping into that warning whisper he used when I was embarrassing him in public. "If you want to eat, the buffet is in the corner. Don't interrupt the toast. I just wanted to ask a question about those investments you mentioned, Dad," I said, stepping forward onto the lawn, right into the center of the crowd. 30 pairs of eyes swung toward me, the smiles fading into confusion as they felt the sudden shift in the air. "You said you managed our family assets perfectly. Does that include the $82,000 that Grandma Elena left strictly for my college tuition? The money you emptied out of my account last week without telling me?"
The backyard went completely dead silent. A piece of steak fell from someone's fork, hitting a paper plate with a distinct wet thud. My mother's face went from flushed pink to an ash-white color within a fraction of a second. She reached out, grabbing Leo's arm so hard her knuckles turned white. "Lucas, stop this nonsense right now!" my dad yelled, his face turning an angry, dark red as he stepped down from the patio stairs toward me. He looked furiously at his boss, Mr. Henderson, who was watching the scene with raised eyebrows. "You are making a fool of yourself. Get inside the house immediately, or I swear to God I will remove you from this property myself." "You won't be removing anyone, Mr. Miller." A calm, professional voice came from the side walkway. Mr. Edward Vance walked out from the shadow of the garage, carrying a thick leather briefcase. Beside him was a man wearing a formal uniform, a county sheriff's deputy holding a stack of stamped legal documents. The guests let out a collective gasp, backing away from the lawn as the officer stepped forward. "Edward," my dad stammered, his corporate confidence completely shattering as he looked at my grandmother's old attorney. "What is the meaning of this? This is a private family gathering. Why did you bring law enforcement to my home?" "Because, Mark, this is no longer your home," Mr. Vance said smoothly. He walked over to the large patio table, pushed a vase of flowers out of the way, and opened his briefcase with 2 sharp metallic clicks. "And you have no legal right to order anyone off these premises." Julian, my dad's colleague, stepped back while my dad marched over to the table, his hands shaking with rage. "Are you insane? My father bought this house 40 years ago. It belongs to my mother's estate, and as her executor, I have full control over this property. I am listing it for sale next month." "You were the executor, Mark," Mr. Vance corrected, pulling out a certified document with a bright gold county seal. "Your mother left explicit instructions regarding the $82,000 in educational savings account. You signed a custodian agreement that carried a strict non-diversion clause." Mr. Vance turned to the entire crowd of aunts, uncles, and neighbors, his voice clear and ringing across the quiet yard. "Last Tuesday, Mark Miller withdrew the entire balance of Lucas's educational fund to pay a private tuition bill for his older son, Leo. By doing so, without the beneficiary's consent, he legally triggered an automatic trust default." The deputy stepped forward, handing a heavy packet of papers directly to my dad's chest. My dad didn't take them, so the deputy let them drop right onto the table in front of him. "As of 2:15 p.m. today," the deputy announced, his voice flat and professional, "the deed for the property located at 114 Oak Ridge Lane has been officially transferred to the sole ownership of Lucas Miller. Mark and Sarah Miller, you are hereby served with an immediate 48-hour eviction directive for unlawful occupancy. All personal property must be removed by Sunday at 6 p.m., or it will be considered abandoned." The scene that followed was an absolute disaster for my parents. The party disintegrated within 10 minutes. My dad's vice president, Mr. Henderson, quietly handed his wine glass to a caterer, walked up to my dad, and said,
"Mark, we need to have a very serious talk in my office on Monday morning about your financial stability and your management profile." He left without even looking back. The aunts and uncles were in complete shock. My Aunt Clara turned on my mother right there on the grass. "Sarah, how could you do that? You stole Lucas's college money for Leo. After how hard that boy worked, I can't even look at you right now." By 9 p.m., the catering trucks were packing up early, the tents were being taken down in the dark, and the beautiful backyard looked like a war zone covered in discarded paper plates and half-eaten food. Inside, the house was deafeningly quiet. My parents sat at the kitchen island, the exact place where they had told me I was worth nothing 3 days ago. My dad was staring at the eviction notice, his eyes wide and vacant, his hair completely messy where he had been running his fingers through it in panic. My mother was sobbing into her hands, her expensive mascara running down her cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. Leo was sitting on the stairs, his head in his hands, realizing for the first time that his luxury lifestyle was evaporating. Because the trust accounts were frozen due to the default investigation, the tuition check my dad had sent to the film school was flagged for insufficient funds. The school had already sent an automated email suspending his enrollment until a certified bank check was delivered. "Lucas," my dad whispered, looking up as I walked into the kitchen to grab my car keys. His voice was entirely gone, replaced by a pathetic, raspy plea. "You can't do this to us. We're your parents. Where are we supposed to go in 48 hours? All our capital is tied up in the rental property renovations. We don't have the cash to lease an apartment right now. You told me to take out loans, Dad. You told me I could go to the community college downtown. I suggest you find a nice, cheap, extended stay motel near your office. I hear they have great weekly rates." "Lucas, please," my mother begged, reaching out her hand to touch my arm. I stepped back, letting her hand fall onto the empty counter. "We did it for the family. We just wanted Leo to have a chance. We were going to pay you back, I swear." "No, you weren't. You didn't even look at my acceptance letter. You hid it in a drawer with the coupons. You treated me like a financial burden for 18 years while I washed floors and stocked shelves to earn my place. Grandma Elena saw exactly who you were, and she made sure the house went to the only person who actually cared about her memory. They spent the entire weekend packing their lives into cardboard boxes and black trash bags. I sat on the porch, watching my dad drag his expensive outdoor grill into the back of a rented U-Haul truck, his back slumped, his face lined with pure humiliation as the neighbors stood on their lawns, watching the entire eviction happen in broad daylight. The man who was obsessed with appearances became the biggest scandal on the block.
A month later, the house on Oak Ridge Lane was completely quiet. I didn't stay there. The rooms held too many memories of cold silences and whispered rejections. Working with Mr. Vance, I put the property on the market. Because of the excellent school district, it sold within 3 weeks for nearly $450,000. With that capital, Mr. Vance helped me set up a completely secure, private educational trust. I paid my university tuition for the entire 4 years up front. I bought my books, paid my dorm fees, and moved into the Honors Engineering housing facility 2 weeks late, but with my head held high. I remember my first night in my dorm room. The room was small, with plain cinder-block walls, a simple wooden desk, and a window that looked out over the university quad. It didn't have granite countertops, and it didn't smell like expensive vanilla candles. But as I sat at that desk, opening my advanced physics textbook, I felt a deep, profound sense of freedom that I had never experienced in my entire life. I haven't spoken to my parents or Leo since the day the U-Haul pulled away from the house. My Aunt Clara told me they moved into a small, rented 2-bedroom townhouse on the edge of the city. My dad was passed over for his promotion at the construction firm, and Leo is currently working the night shift at a local warehouse, his Hollywood dreams completely put on hold until he can figure out how to pay his own way through life. Sometimes when I'm walking across the campus late at night after a long study session, I look up at the stars and think about Grandma Elena. I remember the smell of her lavender soap and the steady weight of her hand covering mine on that old wooden stool. She knew that the loudest people in the room didn't have anything important to say, and she knew that true strength doesn't come from stealing someone else's future. It comes from standing your ground until the truth finally clears the room. It takes a lot of courage to realize that you don't owe your future to people who are willing to destroy your dreams just to protect their own favoritism. Sometimes the hardest boundary you have to set is the one with the people who brought you into this world. Have you ever had a situation where your family showed their true colors over money, inheritance, or an unfair double standard between siblings? How did you find the strength to stand up for yourself and build your own path out of that situation? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments section below. I read through them, and your stories always remind me that none of us are truly alone in these struggles. If Lucas's journey and Grandma Elena's clever justice brought a smile to your face today, please take a brief second to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that hard work and integrity always find a way to win in the end. Thank you so much for watching, and stay strong out there.